Procrastination among kids and adolescents is a really common challenge. And part of the reason that so many kids struggle with procrastination is for the same exact reason that adults do, which is that it's really reinforcing in the short term. If you think about the last time that you put off a task that you didn't want to do, you probably felt that immediate sigh of relief. I don't have to do this right now, right? Of course, what we know is that sooner rather than later, we do have to face that task. And that's part of why procrastination creates so much stress in the long run. One important thing, though, for parents and educators to understand is that procrastination is rarely about laziness. So while it might be tempting as a parent or a teacher to say, well, this child is just lazy or they just don't care, that's very rarely the case. Often there are other underlying challenges that might be contributing to this behavior. So that can include things like difficulty sustaining attention and maintaining focus. It can be difficulty with time management, prioritizing tasks, planning and organizing. There can be underlying learning challenges like a reading disability, for example, that are contributing to procrastination in certain subject areas. Kids may struggle with low motivation or negative self-esteem, which can be related to depression. And of course, anxiety and stress can often be a reason for procrastination. And that includes things like perfectionism. There are several red flags to watch out for that may indicate that procrastination is starting to become a larger issue and it may be time to seek help. The first is just the frequency of the behavior. So if you're noticing that a child is procrastinating several times a week or more, that may be a time in which it's time to seek help for the issue. Another example is when it's starting to interfere with a child's quality of life. So things like sleep, friendships, extracurriculars, school, things like that. And I'll give you a few examples. So one is when a child is consistently putting off studying or doing homework until really late at night, and then the next day they're really tired and they might have trouble focusing in class or for their extracurricular activities, and they may be really irritable at home. Another example is the child who waits until the 11th hour to do their work, and so they're cutting corners, they're making careless mistakes, and their grades may suffer because of it. And a third example is kids who are not just procrastinating with chores and schoolwork, but also with basic hygiene. And so they're having difficulty remembering to shower every day, to change their clothes, to brush their teeth, and things like that. Another red flag to watch out for is when it's starting to impact other people in the child's life. So this can include siblings, parents, classmates. And I think a classic example of this is the child who waits until really late Sunday night to mention to their parents they have a project due the next day and they need supplies. And so then the parent has to run out Sunday night to the store to get things. They're stressed, everybody's feeling really tense, right? And then another red flag to watch out for is when a child is faced with a task or a chore and they're having a really big emotional reaction that seems out of proportion to the task. So this might look like a full-blown panic attack or a meltdown, or for younger kids, a full tantrum that just feels really disproportionate. And then lastly, and this is a big one, is when the procrastination starts to turn into full-on avoidance, meaning they're not just putting off work or tasks for a few hours, but they are completely avoiding it altogether. And one thing we know in my work with kids is that often avoidance can become a really vicious cycle, because the more that we put something off, the harder it is to approach it. So we really want to nip it in the bud before it gets to that point. The good news is that there are a lot of things that parents and educators can do to support a child or teen who's consistently procrastinating. The first thing, and I think this is one that often gets overlooked, is trying to get to the root of the problem. So as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of reasons that a child may be procrastinating. We don't want to make assumptions about what the cause is for each child. So get curious with the child. Share your observations, try to do it in a really neutral, non-judgmental tone, and ask them what they think is getting in the way. For some kids, it might be helpful to offer a few potential explanations. So you could say, I'm wondering, for example, if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're not sure where to start. Or I wonder if you're feeling anxious about your ability to do the task. Or maybe you're not feeling super motivated. Again, really important to be non-judgmental and calm so that the child opens up to you. Another thing that you can do is to talk to your child's school. So this can be sharing your observations with your child's teacher, with a guidance counselor or school psychologist if there is one. Share your concerns, hear what they're noticing in school. And it may be that the child may benefit from undergoing a neuropsychological evaluation at school to help rule out a learning disability or something like ADHD, for example. If the reason that a child is procrastinating is because they're struggling with things like time management, poor planning, difficulty staying organized, you can consider reaching out to an executive functioning coach. Their job is really to teach specific strategies to kids to help them with these types of issues. Another thing that parents and educators can do is for themselves actually teaching some of these strategies to kids. I think a lot of these strategies are really common sense to a lot of adults, but they might not be for a lot of kids. So this can include things like helping kids break down assignments into smaller chunks so it feels more approachable. Another thing they can do is help kids kind of decide how long can they work for a sustained period of time. Set that as a goal, use a visual timer, and then set a short timer for a break. I like to call them a brain break, where kids can move around, get a snack, things like that. So for younger kids, it might be 15 to 20 minutes at a time with a 2-minute brain break. For older adolescents, it might be closer to 20 or 30 minutes with a 5-minute brain break. You can also help kids eliminate distractions in their environment. So for teens, this might mean keeping their cell phone in another room so they're not tempted to look at social media. For younger kids, it might be making sure they're in a really quiet, non-stimulating environment away from a window. They can wear noise-canceling headphones, things like that. And then lastly, helping kids identify rewards for task completion. That can be really motivating. And then lastly, really making sure that kids are still engaging in their day-to-day routines and basic hygiene. So making sure they're getting adequate sleep, nutrition, hydration, exercise. Because when those things start falling to the side, it can just make procrastination a lot worse. So we really want to make sure they're still engaging in those types of things that can help kind of break the procrastination cycle.